Welcome to episode 7 of Roar, where we speak up and speak out to preserve our democracy. And it's our individual responsibility as citizens of the United States to say with one voice sometimes, but with just our own at others, and to what we want this country to look like. But remember, in the center of life's storms, we can stand serene. But I'm going to bring Rick Rosner on today, and let's talk about what we want to roar about.
Hello. Uh-oh, let me drink something.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't a roar. That was just trying to clear out the phlegm. So we can talk about insider trading for a second.
Interesting topic. Yes.
So yesterday, Trump announced he was putting the war on hold for 5 days. And the price of oil dropped from like 100 a barrel to 88. 14 minutes before Trump made the announcement, somebody placed roughly $1.5 billion, I think, in stock and futures trades. A massive set of trades,
right,
all at once. It wasn't a bunch of people. It was one person.
Right.
And this is illegal because obviously the person had insider information. And the person probably made what, $300 million in half an hour from placing these stock bets, basically. Highly illegal. According to everything I've read, very easy to trace it to the person who did this, and very unlikely that this person will be caught and prosecuted because Trump has eviscerated the board that catches people doing this. It's
Correct.
a 5-person board. There's only one person on the board right now, and I think it's a Trump appointee. So this person who made this $300 million profit illegally, because in futures, as Sasha explained to me this morning, any money you make, somebody else loses. So this was an unfair bet because you're not supposed to use insider information. You know, Martha Stewart did an insider trade to save herself $80,000 in losses. This is what, 4,000 times as big an offense. Martha Stewart didn't go to jail for the insider trading. She went to prison for lying to the FBI when they investigated her for it. This is a humongous trade. Anyway, nobody's going to do anything about it because we live under frickin' Trump.
Yes, there are many things that you're touching upon that I feel very strongly about, and one is that Martha Stewart was targeted, and the cover-up is always worse than the crime, it seems. But the fact is that somebody was tipped off prior to the announcement.
Now, right, somebody in the White House called somebody else.
Right. So we have to trace it back not only to the person that executed the trade, but to the person that tipped them off that this was going to happen. So somebody profited an enormous amount of money, maybe even more than what you're suggesting. And it's because they got tipped off. Who else got tipped off? Who knows? But, you know, the fact is that no one should be tipped off. And if someone is tipped off, they cannot execute their trades. Yet, as you pointed out, the people that investigate and try to stop this type of thing from happening are no longer empowered because of the Trump administration. And what this is indicating to me is, you know, the disparity of wealth is growing at an accelerating pace under the Trump administration, where the rich get richer and at the expense of others. You know, so when people are worried about going to the grocery store and what the price of their bill will be upon checkout, these people, and it's not just the 1%. We talked about the 1% for a long time, but it's the 0.1%, the very, very few who are making extraordinary decisions based on insider trading or collusion, and they're getting incredibly wealthy to the point where, I'm not saying Elon Musk is involved in any of this, but you know his wealth is approaching what John D. Rockefeller's. was compared to the rest of the country.
Musk, if he collects on the salary that he's negotiated with Tesla, I believe he'll become the world's first trillionaire. What's he worth now? 400 billion.
Well,
And,
yeah, it's
and
staggering, but to conceive of. But
also he's becoming more nakedly an asshole. He's becoming more nakedly a white supremacist, which he pushes via the social media app that he owns, X, which is a terrible place to be now because with all the hate and so there's a general thing happening that leads me to my general question for this hour, which is whose minds can we possibly change? And the deal is that Trump is sabotaging himself because he's a desperate idiot. He was never super. I mean, he was probably a little smart as a younger person, but his laziness tended to work against that. And he's, in his old age, he's lazier and dumber and also more desperate to distract from the Epstein files. So he started this war stupidly thinking that he would quickly achieve something.
Yeah.
And it's terrible timing for him for the war because gas will hit $4 a gallon tomorrow, nationwide average. It's $3.98. Trump was talking about $1.99 gas in all his speeches. Now it's double that. And I looked it up, and it'll take 3 to 6 months for the knock-on effects in prices, grocery prices, everything else, to be affected by fuel prices. So we can expect inflation to be nasty for the next 3 to 6 months, probably more, because once things go up, they much more slow. They either don't go down at all or they go down much more slowly. So anyway, that takes us into September at least, at which point all the most voters don't pay much attention to voting issues until a month before the election, and that we're going to be looking at like huge inflation. And Trump hasn't created any new jobs in the last year. So anyway, all this stuff is building up. Trump's negative approval is the biggest it's been of this presidency. It's almost as bad as it was for him after he encouraged the attack on the Capitol at the end of the last time he was president. He's got negative 16% approval. 40% approve, 56% don't approve. And among the independents, only depending on which poll you look at, between 18 and 29% of independents approve. And he's still got strong support among Republicans, but Republicans are only 1/4 of voters. So he's going to lose the House. He may lose the Senate. He's going to try to sabotage the elections. He probably won't be able to. But in this whole landscape, what is there for us to do? Where Trump is screwing himself, the people whose minds we'd want to change, the MAGAs, cannot have their minds are set. They will grow old and die still believing or pretending to believe a bunch of bullshit. So what point is there in roaring when it feels like events and set minds, mean that we can't change minds?
Yes, it reminded me that a couple seasons ago, I had a show called Change Your Mind. And it wasn't about changing other people's minds, it was about changing your own. And not everyone is gifted with that. Not everyone is developed the capability to do that. So once they're set in their ways and made their decisions, they cling to it and hold on to it. But these are desperate times, and there people are waking up that they have not been told the truth. And I remember in the Vietnam War, we came to this sudden realization that they weren't telling us the truth. And my father told me at the time, well, that happened, blah blah blah, when he was young. And you know so this is a reoccurring thing when we realize, hey, we're not being told the truth. And how many people are going to wake up to that effect?
Well,
Well,
I
the
don't know
more
because
people that
the
speak out,
independence, yeah.
the people who speak up and speak out about it show some um, capacity to change other people's minds if they're open to changing their minds. And if you're independent, you're open to changing your mind. And you can be swayed by the course of events. But if you're dug in, there's no point in roaring at them. So this is where you meet someone and you meet them where they're at and say what they can hear. And you know that some people can't hear what you're going to say. So there's no point in saying it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't speak up to the people who are undecided, can be convinced, or just don't have the information. Because, for example, if Elon Musk controls a media outlet like X, which used to be Twitter, which was one of the nicer forms of democratic ability for people to communicate one another across boundaries, across borders, across states, and this has been turned into a megaphone for someone trying to dominate the conversation. And so all you can do is speak up and speak out when you can, and where you can, and when you can, and when it's appropriate. So sometimes if you're in front of a mega crowd, there may be no point in standing up and saying, I don't agree with you. But there are many opportunities, and we have to be open to when we get an opportunity to speak our minds and say, this is wrong. This is not what our country stands for. This is not what our country was built on. And it has not stood for this in 250 years. And this bullying, this war of choice, for example, he was under the delusion that if he takes out the leadership, the Iranian people would rise up. And this is, people don't rise up when you're bombing them, they hide. So there was no possibility of this happening, yet he thought he would become a hero. So to understand Trump, and think of his ego is running the show now. He wants to be on Mount Rushmore, and he's going to do something to make him a hero for the ages. So what is he going to do next? Who knows? He's capable of anything.
So people on the MAGA side, not everybody. I mean, there's still plenty of decent Republicans.
Sure.
Um, I grew up in a Republican household, and they weren't terrible people. They didn't believe a bunch of bullshit, unless the whole country happened to believe it and just nobody knew better. But
right.
But now MAGAs, they get enjoyment out of being bullshitted. A lot of them know they're being told bullshit, and they like that it upsets us that they believe shit, that they know Trump is a crappy person in every way, and they like that it hurts us that they continue to follow him and not disapprove of him. They get more enjoyment out of following a piece of shit than they would out of admitting he's a piece of shit.
Well, this is where we as individuals have to work on staying serene in the storms of life, because this is our choice, whether to get upset and to get worked up, or
right.
to speak up with a calm voice and say to others, you're being lied to. I understood that he tried to pass off the responsibility for the war on his defense secretary.
On Hegseth. Who I'm
yeah.
sure does have a lot of culpability in this, because Hegseth is a bad guy and an idiot.
But where does the buck stop? It stops with the president.
Yeah.
So it was Trump.
Sometimes instead of, I will just say something filthy on Twitter, instead of like calling something out, because calling something out is often worthless. Um, like it came out yesterday that Christy Nome, she filmed this ad saying that ICE is coming to get you. And between the production and the ad buys, I think they spent $200 million on it. You've seen the ads. It was hard to miss it, right? And the production budget included $20,000 for horse rental. She's riding a horse. How could she possibly? Also, she owns her own horses. She's from South Dakota. Wouldn't it have been cheaper just to they filmed her in front of Mount Rushmore, which I believe is South Dakota, right? Wouldn't it have been cheaper just to use her own? How could you spend? So instead of saying, how the fuck could you spend 20,000? I said, the only time I spent 20,000 on a horse, I was sleeping with her. And then I talked about Buttercup and her tight haunches and her deep wise eyes and her blonde mane. And I said, oh, Buttercup. And this will change nobody's mind, but at least I told people on Twitter that I had been fucking a horse.
Yeah.
Which, it doesn't, I don't think it changes anybody's mind, but at least it, like, I don't know what it does. It just throws.
And kids, don't try this at home. He is a professional.
Well, no, but I'm bad that way, because like it's not even funny, really.
Yeah, and that is in the eye of the beholder. But the idea that you're mocking them is essentially what you're doing. And does that make you feel better? For a little while, it does.
A little bit, because I put on X that I had an affair with a horse.
Yeah, and there is a shock value to that. However, we can't be let wisdom pay the price of cleverness. Once we're clever, we think we get some kick out of that. But the wiser approach is to, with a calm voice, tell people the facts. And I didn't think that Trump would get reelected, and I was shocked when he was. So I thought that the appeal to better angels would work, and it didn't. And but I don't want to give up hope. I still believe in people in this country will, when they have the information in front of them, when they've accepted the facts rather than the lies. Media is still saying things that are simply not true, and they don't have other sources of information, then they get misled. So people get misled, and there's advertising industry that's completely dependent on the people's ability to be misled. But they understand when it comes time to vote, what's hitting their pocketbook, what's hitting their gas prices, for example. One, going to the grocery store and seeing prices higher, that's another. And they tend to throw the bums out. And when they do that,
because on both sides, but I'd say more with MAGA, people are being willingly misled. They're being told some paper-thin bullshit, and they choose to go with it because they like it. And like with Christy Nome, everybody knows the facts. She shot a puppy because she didn't like the puppy. She just shot it in the head. And people who know a little more of the story know that at the same time, she shot a goat for smelling like a goat. Goats have a characteristic not good smell. She didn't like it, even though she's been a farmer and rancher. She knew what goats smelled, but she just didn't like it. Bam, shot the goat, left the murdered goat's body in a rock quarry. Just left him to rot. She's an asshole and a grifter and an idiot, and both sides know this. But so, like you say, share the facts. Those facts about the dog murder, she wrote the story herself in her autobiography. Everybody knows it. So I don't know how to share facts in a way that. So I instead I tweeted that I fucked a horse.
Yeah, well, you get to your place of serenity any way that you can. What works for you may not work for me.
I'm not very serene. I'm not so serene. My wife says, just stop. You know, you're making yourself. You know, you're not. But I don't know
Well,
what to do.
well, the thing is, in the first Trump administration, I let it get to me, and in the second administration, I have decided to be in a witness mode and to watch what happens, rather than personally take it, um, allow it inside me to affect me and to upset me, which it still does. I see a headline and I get upset, but I calm myself by taking one deep breath. And if one isn't enough, I take two, and I can relax again because it's better for me to be calm and relaxed when I'm trying to convince others. Because when we get into shouting matches, no one's convincing anyone of anything. But if we stay calm and stick to the facts, I believe enough people, and if it's 51% of the people, that's going to be enough. Um, but they have to go out and vote. They have to be empowered to vote. They can't say, as many people have, it doesn't matter, because look what it doesn't matter got us.
So I think we'll have enough. We'll certainly have. I don't think you can even bet with a bookie about who's going to control the House because bookies don't.
Not taking
They,
that back. Yeah.
they don't take action
Well, they
on
give
short.
odds that might yeah, discourage
Yeah.
you. Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll win the House. We got a shot at the Senate, but of
Even
course
that
Trump.
Senate's in play is amazing.
Yeah,
You know,
but our politics is set up to be pretty evenly divided. We
mhm.
had the last time a presidential candidate got more than 53% of the vote was George W. Bush in 1988. Every other election has been closer than that. Um, and which is crazy considering some of the elections we've had that it was really that close a thing.
Right.
Um,
So
so,
people's
and
votes
it,
matter. And if you change one person's mind, that's significant. It may not be enough to tip an election, but if enough people are changing one person's mind, that's
yeah,
significant. And so, try to change somebody's mind who's someone's that and but pick your spots, pick your fights. It's not something that you want to go into and try to change everyone's mind, because everyone is not going to agree with you. That's just the way life is. And you have to accept that. You're not going to change everyone's mind. But if you can influence a little bit someone's thinking so that they make a better choice for themselves and for others, because so many people are thinking about themselves only when they go to the voting booth. But we live in a society, and when the society is suffering as it is today, even though the outrageous portion of 1% are becoming so incredibly wealthy, it's just hard to wrap your mind about them around the numbers that they're worth in terms of paper value. And
and
what
they're
are they
not
doing?
good guys like Peter. I mean, they think some of the guys think they are. Well, they've got kind of messiah complexes. Peter Thiel thinks that they're anti-democratic. They think that they should lead the everybody into the future. Peter Thiel goes around and gives speeches about what the Antichrist. He's a powerful billionaire. He's the financial engine behind VP Vance, and this guy is talking about the Antichrist. But in general, what Americans tell ourselves stories about who we are. After World War I, we told ourselves that we made the world safe for democracy. After World War II, we beat back evil. And that's a legitimate story because the Nazis were freaking evil. And probably after the Civil War, we told ourselves we abolished slavery and fairness won and we've preserved the Union. And so for 100 years, we viewed ourselves as noble and selfless. But that story of ourselves has been eroded over the past 30, 40 years, where there are a lot of Americans who don't pride themselves on fairness. They pride themselves on getting theirs, on zero sum thinking, where immigrants are taking our shit and we got to get rid of them. Now, the reality is that the U.S. population growth, lowest it's ever been, under 0.5% a year. We're making less than 80% of the babies we need to have a stable population without immigration. If it weren't for immigration, our population would be declining. So obviously,
and they're doing jobs that we wouldn't do, U.S. citizens wouldn't do, and starting businesses that we would not.
Or when they do jobs that we would do, they're doing them like construction jobs. Construction that's a good job, but they're doing it under worse conditions and for shittier money than we would. You know, I listen to stand-up radio, stand-up routines on the radio when I drive, and a couple of comedians talk about Mexican construction workers, how they're out there 14 hours a day under horrible conditions. Like, yeah, right. If you've ever tried to be a roofer for a day, oh my God, that's the worst. Or somebody who does concrete form pouring, where you're taking walking around with giant plywood sheets that are covered with old concrete. Oh my, terrible jobs. They're doing them 14 hours a day for $14, $15 an hour under the table. And without that, houses would cost more.
And you were getting to the point. What you were saying was there's a tendency to people that they get ahead by stepping on the necks of others, and that's never the way.
But also the illegals or non-illegal immigrants who are getting paid actual paychecks, not under the table, they're paying payroll taxes, Social Security taxes. They pay taxes, and because they're not citizens, they don't have access to the payoffs. When they pay into Social Security, they can't get Social Security. So we actually make money off of the immigrants.
Well, it's just the old logic era of turning someone into the other, that we hate the other. The other is a threat, so that we dehumanize them. Trump talked about rapists and drug cartels, flooding the borders. And that's what people were trying to leave places where they were no longer capable of living safely and come to a better place for their children. And this is what the history of immigration has been. People leaving places where they were desperate, impoverished. The Statue of Liberty says, "Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses." And I grew up believing that.
Yeah, and I believe it too. But we're not Europe, where French people have lived in France for thousands of years. Whitey and Black people and Asian people in America, the longest they've lived here is since the 1600s, right? We all came from someplace else. 120 years ago, the U.S. population, everybody here, was 1/6 not born here. Now it's roughly the same, 16, 17, 18% not born here. It's not a lot different than it's ever been. There was a time where it got down under 10%, but the border Trump has really closed off the border for the past 14 months, right? Has your life changed? Has anybody's life changed for the better because the border has been closed off? And it's possible to make an argument have rents gone down? I don't think so. Has crime gone down? I don't think so. Have fentanyl deaths have opioid deaths gone down? Now, that might be the case. That might be one area where is less fentanyl coming in. I don't know. I'd be open to an argument about that. In fact, let me ask AI.
Yeah, because the people find ways to get the illegal substances across borders, whether or not you close them, and this has been historically true. Because the criminals are always ahead of the game until they get caught, if they get caught. And the border closures are one thing, but what about fixing the legitimate way of getting into the country? We can't just put people in the queues and put them in barns and wait until they can see a judge. The whole system's broken. So it's one thing to put the money into closing it. It's another to put the money into fixing the legal way to get into the country. And
So fentanyl into the U.S. seems to have dropped. According data indicates the amount seized at the southern border has decreased, with a 54% drop by March of 2025 compared to March of 2024.
that's across the border only.
That's coming over the southern border.
Right.
And overdose deaths have been declining, but look, when they're measuring March 2025, Trump had only been president for 2 months, so that drop, 10 months of that year with the drop were under Biden, and they'd also dropped in 2024 compared to 2023. So any declines in fentanyl had been going for, well, possibly 2 years under Biden before Trump even came in.
I didn't even know what that word was until relatively recently.
Fentanyl?
When I was growing up and fentanyl wasn't a thing.
No, it didn't exist. It's a new drug. Let's see, when was fentanyl invented?
And the overdose deaths were largely due to a lack of awareness. And so
it was invented in 1960, began being used in the U.S. in 1968. I don't know when I guess it exploded in use, and it was, in the 2010s.
Right. Yeah, that's when I first heard of it. And a lot of these deaths were unwitting because people weren't aware that they were consuming something that was laced with fentanyl.
Right. In the 80s, when when somebody bought a dealer bought, like, I don't know, half a kilo of Coke, they would cut it to turn it into maybe 2 kilos of Coke. I mean, that was, everybody,
Everybody knew that. Yeah.
I worked in a bar where there was it was such an annoying place because there was so much Coke flying around. But the Coke you got was like maybe 25% pure because people kept stepping on it, but they would step on it with baby laxative, or vitamin B, just some white powder to stretch it.
Yeah.
But now fentanyl is so powerful and so cheap that when you can step on stuff with fentanyl, and it makes for a different high, I guess, because it puts you, it's a downer. And so, but people just throw it into throw it into stuff, and it's
in lethal doses.
Well, a dose the size of, say, 2 specks of salt, 2 cubic millimeters of fentanyl will kill you. So it's easy to put enough fentanyl into something that it accidentally kills you.
Yeah. So I think the drop in these fentanyl-related deaths is largely due to the rise of the awareness of what they're taking. And
Well, everybody's supposed to have the what, I forget the name of the shots, but the OD, shots
yeah,
that.
that's proliferating around the country. When I travel, I see it, and it's one of the things that um, we have a way of resuscitating you back to life, but you still accidentally took your own life, tried to, and but the attempts at this kind of thing, the desire to have something in your system to change the way you feel is still a profound. It's a scourge on our country. And one of the expressions of that is a loss of hope. When people don't feel like that their tomorrow is going to be better than their yesterday. And you and I
And
grew up
we're on the
with things.
second generation of that.
Yeah.
So the boomers were the generation, our generation, that was convinced and largely came out to be true that we do better than our parents. Our
Mm-hmm.
freaking parents grew up in the Depression, and then they
Mm-hmm.
fought in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, my parents, my dad, my stepdad, my father-in-law, they were drafted during the Korean War era. We were saved all that.
Right.
Um, and we have houses. The houses are paid off. The houses have a ton of room for furniture and a bunch of crap. Um, and then Gen X, less of that. The statistic I keep citing is 94% of the privately held wealth in America belongs to people 45 years old and older. So only one out of every $16 in people's pockets belongs to people under 45. So that's Gen X, that's Gen Z, that's the millennial. And then now we have Gen Alpha on the horizon. So that's 2, 3, 4 generations of people who've kind of gotten fucked.
Well, they don't believe that their future will be better, not even than their parents, but in their own lives, it's going to get worse.
Yeah,
They're
and one like part of the things are changing fast, and there are a lot of good changes. The number of new medical discoveries it's crazy. It makes me optimistic. But most of the stuff that makes news are changes that are not great. Um, that
Yeah,
we,
the rate of change is accelerating for the good and the bad. And
so
yeah, go ahead.
tech is chewing up the good old school jobs and replacing them with crap new half-ass jobs, Uber driver, DoorDash, OnlyFans. There are more people selling their flesh on OnlyFans than there are cops, than there are doctors in the US. And yeah, maybe it sounds great that, yeah, all you have to do is show your titties and your butt and the money comes rolling in, except no, it doesn't. You're showing your titties and your butt, and only what, the top 3%, 2% of people on OnlyFans make more than, I don't know, $800 a month. And it's a terrible, all-consuming job, because the way you sell yourself is you set yourself up as a hot influencer, and then you have to make friends, you have to get subscribers, you have to communicate with them. You're pimping yourself out. If you're successful enough, you can hire somebody to do the messaging for you, but it's not a freaking life of luxury.
Yes, and even though luxury is something that the advertising sells to us, what we would be comfortable with is a life of dignity, and that is being taken from us as well. People are losing their dignity, their sense of self-esteem, and these are the things that are precious to individuals, because without it, they don't feel capable of bettering their condition. They don't, and where we have to give hope to the hopeless and empower the powerless, because these things are still achievable. The lives of quiet dignity are still achievable. And
but those aren't the stories that we're telling ourselves about modern life.
right.
Now,
But it's
I'm a
still
filthy guy. I like, I like blue humor, right?
mm-hmm.
Um,
Red
so
Fox. I grew up
yeah,
listening.
and everybody after him. Um,
Yeah.
though
I'm
I
sorry.
do get
Dated
annoyed.
myself.
I don't like stuff that's dirty just for the sake of being dirty. I like stuff that, but there's just so much modern foolishness and lack of dignity um, that that people have, they devalue themselves, they devalue others,
Yes.
because it's hard to find a moral foundation in with all this nonsense flying around. Um, I can talk about it in terms of sexual behavior. Now, I like, well, I'm a dirty guy. I like sex, but when you look at like, um, there was not much sex before marriage among people who considered themselves decent before the pill came along in 1960. And when it came along for the first few years of the pill, you could only get a prescription if you were married. You went to your doctor and you said, I need some birth control within my marriage. And then you got your prescription. It took years till like 1964, 65 before unmarried people could even get a prescription. And then by the end of the 60s, it was starting to loosen things up and people were having sex outside of marriage. Before say 1950, probably most of the sex, well, a lot of the sex outside of marriage was either people who weren't considered to have dignity or hookers.
Or
And
people
then
who are married with their neighbor's wife.
yeah, but for the most part, people at least maintained facades of
That's for sure.
respectability. Um,
Watch the
and
TV from the 50s, and you would think that everyone was a morally outstanding individual, except for the Eddie Haskells, and
right,
and they were on the
and
show just to show you what that would be like.
right. So now you look at the rise of the BJ. Our parents' generation did not do oral sex for the most part. That that was maybe, I don't know, maybe you'd see it in a porno. Maybe, I don't know, prostitutes would do it, but a normal married couples who who were born say from, I don't know, 1880 to 1950 did not freaking do that. And now, a BJ is part of like everybody's, if you're in any kind of relationship or any kind of dating life, that's just a thing you do, which is fine. And it's an interesting change the way it flipped so crazily from nobody to everybody. But in the middle of, and this is one of like 150 huge changes in society. I mean, we went from the Brady Bunch on in prime time in the 60s to NBC primetime sitcoms, to, if anybody's even watching them anymore, doing jokes about anal sex. It's a crazy flip, and with all that changing so fast and so pervasively, people get confused morally. There's nothing immoral about a BJ, but if it's one of 150 things that are different now from 10, 20, 30 years ago, it's easy to get confused about what's, the role of morality in our lives.
Well, it's true also in that the idea was that sex was to procreate, And so if it didn't involve getting pregnant, then there was something dirty about it. And
Yeah.
so I bristle at the idea because, it can be a beautiful experience for both partners. And it's something that does not have to involve procreation. To me, that was the moral change that took place in the late 60s and early 70s that I saw in my own life. Women were feeling empowered. And that was a beautiful thing to see. Of course there have been blowbacks and pushbacks and over reach and all of those things. So that's the way society makes progress, is and I think that our attitudes towards sex have progressed, not without consequences and not without misunderstandings. And so I'm very curious about what the Gen Z people really think, what their experience is really like. And I know that you say they're just not as involved in it, that in their and they're can be amused by their phones and what have you. But I still think that there is a place for intimacy, and whether or not the younger generations are experiencing it the way that I was able to experience it, I don't know. I assume so. Again, I'm going to just fall back on hope that people will find there's joy can be found in that expression, and it is not all about self. How do you make yourself feel, but how do you make someone else feel is also that's a
So
gift.
we need new stories to tell ourselves that incorporate some kind of
I
human
like
value.
that. I like that.
But these stories are going to have to include tech, because if you look at people out on the street, like, it's not just Gen Z or Gen Alpha. Everybody is on their phones. I'm more pissed off at somebody my age on their phone in their car than I am at somebody who's Gen Z, because freaking, I know Gen Z has been marinating in tech their whole life.
Mm.
Somebody my age on their phone in their car has only had their phone for 10 years. They're gonna fuck up more than Gen Z while they're driving.
But I think that is correct. But again, what we can tell is stories. That's a great idea. Incorporating the values. Like I grew up on Superman with George Reeves playing Superman. Truth,
Mhm.
justice, and the American way.
Yeah.
I still believe in truth and justice, and I'm not so sure about the American way anymore. We've got to do something to change our
So
society. Believe in its
even
best self.
Superman is like, he's gone through some various incarnations.
Yes.
Um, Christopher Reeve was maybe the best ever Superman. And he really was, he kind of was wholesome and heroic
He
and
looked the part.
tragic. And then there were later incarnations of Superman where, like, I think in Batman versus Superman, they actually like destroyed like a square mile of the city. The fight between, I don't know, was it General Zod came back in
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and they devastated. They killed tens of thousands of. They're not really. They're soft pedaled, but the battle just like was brutal and left a smoking hole in Metropolis. And then James Gunn brought back a newer, kind of slightly geeky, more wholesome Superman. At the same time, James Gunn has a series called Peacemaker, which is a
I've,
totally filthy, filthy series
I've
about.
never seen it. I've read about it though. Yeah.
You've
Have you
seen
seen
it? Yeah, no, I love it. It's
it?
about Superman is
I'm
a
making a note.
level superhero. Peacemaker is about D level superheroes, superheroes who can't even get invited to be part of any kind of a league because they're too crappy and unpredictable and incompetent.
Wasn't
And
Peacemaker in one of those Harley Quinn movies too? I can't
yeah,
remember.
no, the second Suicide Squad movie. The
Ah,
first one was
I knew
kind of
I
a
had seen
bummer.
those.
The
Yeah.
second one was James Gunn, and I thought was great. I would watch that again anytime. And yeah, John Cena as
Oh
Peacemaker,
yes, yes.
who is a huge, a terrible guy,
Arrested.
a rotten guy. Um,
Yeah.
he got a spin-off, and it's he's a rotten guy doing terrible stuff, but making little baby steps in the direction of not being terrible.
Oh,
But it's a really fun show. At the same time, it's the dirtiest freaking show about superheroes you can
oh,
imagine. Like Peacemaker gets turned down to be part of this Justice Squad with Green Lantern. So he
right.
goes. So it cuts from him walking out of the audition and being all bummed. And the next shot is John Cena doing a bunch of lines back at his crappy house, surrounded by 20 naked people having sex around him. They
I
hired 20 actors willing to simulate sex while he's on his couch all sad doing lines, which is like, and John Cena is America's sweetheart. He's a hero. And so it's hilarious and shocking that to see all these pubes a flying around him. And
tell me what your thoughts are on The Boys. We're going to go to change the show and call it
all right, so The Boys is another super filthy, transgressive superhero show.
Homelander.
That come brought to us by Seth Rogen and Evan. Anyway, and made from so one that we should talk about the comics code, I guess, before. So this happened in movies and comic books in the 1920s or 30s. Before, in like the 1910s and 20s, movies were pretty dirty. And the forces of decency said this can't stand. You cannot be showing boobies in movies. You can't show crime paying in movies. You can't show people like humping in bed, and all this stuff was. And so they formed the Hayes Office, which was a censorship office.
Right.
That if your movie didn't measure up morally, it couldn't get distributed. Then in the 50s, a guy came out with a book called Seduction of the Innocent, which made the claim, and there were hearings in Congress that comics were all fucked up and were perverting the minds of children. And so they established the Comics Code, which meant that comics had to be wholesome. And so from the mid 50s, from about 1954 until the underground comics of the late 60s into the 70s, you had a solid 20 years and more of wholesome comics. Every comic had a little Comics Code emblem on it saying that it passed muster. And so our generation grew up on comics that were clean and justice prevailed. And these now nobody's following that anymore. And
I bought that hook, line, and sinker too.
I kind of hated it. Comics, but I didn't really know what I was seeing compared to what But anyway,
because I was just relate to the outside world.
I knew that comics were suckier than they had to be. And then you have The Boys is a superhero series where everybody is terrible and dysfunctional, and the superhero industry is owned by Vought, the Vought company, that has a chemical that you inject and it will give you superpowers. You don't know exactly whether you'll get really good ones or just horrible, like I don't know. There's one character who has like a super dick. He can make his dick grow to like 18 feet long and use it to whip it at people, and that's a terrible superpower to have. And
Absolutely.
he's in superhero jail because he only got up to no good with it. And the
The
most
puns are just coming
obnoxious
too fast for me. Yeah.
all right, the most obnoxious scene in The Boys, I think, is there's a gay superhero whose superpower is he can shrink down to however small he wants to be. And a thing he and his boyfriend like to do is
I can picture it. Yes.
is he shrinks down to like this big and he crawls up his boyfriend's pee hole, his urethra, because for the feels how it and okay, so that happens, but then the shrinky guy sneezes and returns to normal size and explodes his boyfriend. Just so like every episode of The Boys, somebody gets blown to pieces and just meat flies every place and splatters all over everybody.
Very graphic.
It's that kind of show. At the same time, it's a satire of American fascism because the most powerful superhero is named Homelander, and he's like Superman. Almost nothing can stop him, and he's become an insane fascist who just kills anybody who goes up against him. And he's fronting for the fascists in government. So it's also a brutal satire of our current political situation. And so it's pretty sloppy, but it's also clever in places. You know, it's half dirty for dirtiness sake and gross for grossness sake, and half for a legit political purpose. Right. For commentary. And that in itself is part of the current confusion that it would be easy to look at The Boys and just see exploding penises and, you know, and maybe miss the social commentary. I mean, even though it's pretty blatant, it's blatant enough that a bunch of MAGAs are pissed off at The Boys because it's making fun of MAGA. But it's so the carrier medium, the sauce that the political message is marinated in is so effed up that it's easy for people to not know where the hell they are morally.
I think we're going to return to this subject, and we're going to have to wrap up on this episode. But last question to you is, I've been having pretty good luck with Seth Rogen. You know, if he's involved in something, it's usually pretty interesting.
He knows what he's doing. He's been in the industry. He was recruited out of Canada, I think, for Freaks and Geeks. Which was one of Apatow's first projects, I think. So he was super young, and he's really smart, and he'll do whatever it takes for the project. If the project needs to be profane like The Boys, he'll do that. If it needs to be like a showbiz insider, he did The Studio, which won
I saw some of that.
Bunch of Emmys for being a behind the scenes look at how a movie studio works.
Right.
And very well done. It won, like I said, it won a ton of Emmys.
Yeah.
Very well observed. Yeah, he's good at what he does.
Okay. So thank you for the talk today, Rick. And I think in the future, we're going to talk about morality, and we're going to do some more reviews of popular.
Finding morality today is like bobbing for apples in an outhouse.
Yeah. I'm starting to think about what the next season is going to be titled. Finding Morality is a good one. Thanks a lot, Rick.
All right.
Okay. Oops. I hit the wrong button. That's it for Rick. That's it for me too. And thank you for watching.